So one of the important things to understand whenever you're first using boxcutter is the fundamentals of shading and smoothing. So right now we're looking at a box, so it's really not a whole lot to look at, but let's hold down Control and press 3 and we'll put a subdivision modifier on it. And so now this is no longer a box, it's a little more rounded, not completely spherical. However, if we wanted it to be spherical, we could also add an additional modifier of a cast and just set it to have a factor of 1, and now we have a perfect sphere. So from here we could go under object and choose to shade smooth, and this object is basically smooth. But the next level of that is to deal with Autosmooth, and so right now we're going to leave Autosmooth off, and I'm just going to go under behavior of boxcutter and we're going to turn off Autosmooth. So we're not going to have boxcutter auto smoothing, which is one of the first defaults we added to boxcutter, and we're just going to perform a cut, and we see that this cut looks terrible. And the reason that this cut looks terrible is because of something called Autosmooth, and without Autosmooth it's going to have a bit of a issue with the shading of this cut that we just performed. We could go under our modifiers and get crafty with it. We could put an edge split, but having an edge split is going to stop us from performing another cut because the geometry is broken. So hacking it with an edge split is just not going to do it, and that is why you should definitely become acquainted with your auto smooth angle. The other thing is the actual angle that you're giving it is going to determine at what angle it's going to begin smoothing it. So you can see that as I dial it in, it's just not going to take that. However, your work with hard surface modeling is going to be a battle of you dealing with auto smooth and trying to lower it more and more to really get those angles, because right now if we were to just draw a box and cut a box, we see that this comes in fine. But if we were to draw a box but instead press W to activate Wedge, we can see that everything's so far so good at this 30-degree angle. So it's actually being a little bit more lenient than I would be used to. However, if we begin playing with this angle and just raising the amount, we could see that it actually is going to let it go all the way around. So it's just going to make a fool of me, versus if we just uncheck this, we can see what the model looks like without auto smooth. But really, depending on the angle that you're working, you definitely want to become acquainted with your auto smooth. So let's say we wanted to actually make auto smooth work at a lower angle like this one here, where we're actually sitting at 10 degrees, but we see that it's felling all around on the sphere. And the reason that that's happening is because the sphere doesn't have enough subdivisions in it. So if we add another round of subdivision, we see that the sphere is now rounded enough for it to handle cuts and not get caught up by the auto smooth. So sometimes in videos you'll see me actually jump around auto smooth really quick, because in HardOps, sharpen is built around dealing with smoothing and modifiers and smoothing. But if you look at the tooltip, you'll notice that shift clicking it will bring up an interactive auto smooth. And you can just bring this thing up if you're using HardOps and just roll the wheel and then move the mouse and find increments to really get that perfect number if you're just trying to really just find the right balance for your model to keep going. And I've become so acquainted with doing that I'll just do it without thinking in the middle of a demonstration and just automatically get my model shaded just right. In fact, we see right now that our shading is at 5.7 degrees and our model's just not rounded enough for this. So we could go in and add another round of subdivision, but really that's overkill. Because we have HardOps installed, we can press Alt-V and look at the wireframe, and we see that, you know, we're adding quite a bit of wire here just to get it to be smooth, versus us just going in and actually just shift clicking sharpen and just lowering the auto smooth or rounding it up to something a little bit more reasonable to fit what we're dealing with our surface. So I can understand that this can be a little bit difficult to express, and users can miss these sort of things whenever I'm just blazing through them in videos. But smoothing is one of the fundamental core aspects of modeling. So the next thing I want to talk about is the bevel. So let's say that we use HardOps and we control click bevel in order to add a new bevel. The first thing I would do in this state is actually press 1, which is going to force the auto smooth to jump to 30, which will fix the issue with the faceting of the bevel. So once you bring bevel in, bevel becomes kind of your handoff for what you're dealing with as far as the geometry. So I'm going to press 1, and we now see that the auto smooth angle is at 60, but because we don't actually have smoothing enabled on the object, all of our cutters are actually set to be shaded flat. So this is the difference between having auto smooth on and not having auto smooth. So I'm just going to enable the cutters, and we'll just select all of them, and we'll go under object, and we'll just click on shade smooth, press 1 to go back to our main collection and not be in our cutters collection. And we now see that while the bevel has our result looking a lot better, we do have some geometric inconsistencies. So this is something that I talk about at length in various videos all the time about using modifiers craftily. But you know, whenever these sort of artifacts happen, there's a couple of choices you have. You could either apply your modifiers and just deal with the mesh, or you could, you know, get a little crafty with your mesh and your modifier usage to try to solve these sorts of things. So I'm going to press Q and go under add modifier, and we're just going to add a weld, and I'm just going to roll the wheel up until the weld starts to eat the bevel's lunch, and then shift scroll to roll it up one, and we see that now the weld is being useful in this situation. However, it's taking away more of the surface than we'd like, and on this side it's just becoming quote-unquote a disaster. Since this model's intended to be symmetrical, I'll just select it and use Alt X and the mirror configuration, or the modifier configuration of mirror, to just mirror this to the other side, having our work, because, you know, fixing both sides at the same time is just going to be a whole nother discussion altogether. But the next thing I want to talk about is the type of smoothing artifacts that you see happening on the surface, and this is where weighted normal comes in. So sometimes in a video you'll see me press Q, and I will just alt click sharpen in order to put a weighted normal, and this button won't work if you actually are using emulate numpad. However, if you aren't using it, then alt clicking will allow you to put a weighted normal. Alternatively, under modifier, you can just very easily add a weighted normal, but since weighted normal is so connected to our sharpening behavior and hard surface smoothing, it's now just alt click on sharpen to add a weighted normal. So now we're looking at this shape and everything's looking good so far, and we can actually perform another cut, and you know, everything's just going to work out for us depending on where we cut. Of course, there's always going to be areas where things just aren't going to work out. Like you see at this particular aspect of the mesh, if I were to apply this cut, things just aren't going to work out. But we'll just lower it just a little bit, and this cut still isn't going to work out, but we're just going to click to apply it. And what I mean by not working out in this case is that the bevel is working for most of our edges, but it's not actually catching the edge where our wedge begins. So this is where I use another thing all the time, where I will press Q, go under bevel, and I will just hold Alt and roll the wheel backwards until I grab the edge that I want. And you can see that the moment that it grabs it, it pops in correctly and has a life of its own. And this is one of my favorite things to do inside of HardOps, is just alt scrolling to play with the angle. So sometimes I will play with both the auto smooth and the bevel at the same time in order to really just get this nice balancing act of just non-destructive modeling and not have to deal with a whole lot of rigmarole. So all of our modals are pretty optimized for this type of workflow. So sometimes in videos it can be a little hard to explain these things, since they've been par for the course for the last couple of releases, and thus aren't, you know, new things anymore, or kind of things I feel are things users should probably be used to by now, since they've been a part of Hop so long. Also, there is an 8-hour video going over every aspect of HardOps in case you are curious. So here I am just drawing a cut, performing a solidification with T, and then we just click and apply, and we see that everything is still continuing to be balanced. But really at this point, the cuts that I'm making are really being dictated by the surface underneath. I could get very experimental and just cut wherever I want, but those do come with consequences that would have to be faced. So those are things you want to keep in mind. For example, cutting right here is going to give me a desired result. However, cutting right here is going to give me something that I call a hotline, where you have a bevel too close to another edge and it's going to cause a bit of overlap aliasing. So with that, I always just recommend a little bit of Boolean adjustment, and you should be able to get a fairly fine result. So just like that, I just wanted to do a quick 10-minute video just talking about my workflow with smoothing and shading and weighted normal and my approach with bevel, and hopefully that gives a little bit more insight to these things.